Hello and welcome. You're listening to Sparking Spiritual Growth. I'm Jason Sparks, and for all of you here on Kingdom Purpose Radio, thanks for tuning in. Today we're talking about boundaries. For any time for us to grow, we're going to have these boundaries that are set up, and we're going to discuss in this episode what those boundaries are, what God expects for us, whether or not we should even have boundaries. So anything that we do, of course, we look to Jesus to find out authority. Everything we do in word or deed should be done in the name of the Lord. So does God allow us to have boundaries? Are we allowed then to set up situations in which we can protect ourselves? And if so, what are the boundaries of those boundaries? So that's what we're going to be discussing. God wants us certainly to be active doing good. And that activity can actually, of course, impact all of our lives. And I don't mean just all of our lives in the sense of you and I, our lives, but every part of our lives individually. So we have different aspects of life. We wear different hats. And sometimes those hats or those boundaries can be blurred, and we can even have them, kind of work against each other. Or we can have those different parts of our lives work together. Ideally, we're going to have them working together. But we set up boundaries all the time, and we're taught to do that, and it's a good practice for us to be involved in, but it's good for us to take a step back and see if God wants us to do that and what the dangers are in that. Because with every good thing, there are certainly bad things that can happen. There can be bad consequences. There are always ways to abuse any good thing. And so we want to be careful not to do that. Understanding it then is going to help us tremendously. We need to be able to protect ourselves. We need to be able to find a place, a way to rest, to recuperate. And we're usually really good at that. And so that's really basically what a boundary is. The danger is in finding the balance. And hopefully as we talk through this, you'll see what those boundaries should look like. Maybe those boundaries are not in areas that we think they should be, or maybe they should be in areas that we think shouldn't be. So what do I mean by boundaries? A boundary is simply a set of rules that we set in motion. These rules protect our time, they protect our finances, things like that from unwanted pressures and demands. It's like a CEO. He hides behind his assistant. So when you make a phone call and you want to talk to the head of the company, you're going to have to go through his assistant first. And even at that point, you may have already talked to a lot of other people trying to find a way to get to him. So when people call, they want to pressure him about certain things, or maybe they have problems and he doesn't have time to deal with a lot of the issues and problems. So he hides behind his assistant or maybe his managers. Now, a good CEO is going to have some type of open door policy. I mean, they're going to have some way for people to come in and discuss things with him. But sometimes we see people, they just hide themselves away. So it's almost impossible to actually speak with them. If you've actually had difficulties with customer service, or maybe you've had you bought something from somewhere, from a store or something, you had to call someone. Have you ever gotten the runaround? You can't find the person that you need to speak to because they're kind of hidden. They're hidden behind other operators. There are all kinds of ways that people hide themselves. And that's something that is good in a sense, but also can be bad, because if we need to get to access someone, we need to have access to someone, we can't always have it. Now, like I said, a good CEO is going to have ways for you to get a hold of him. It's very important, and you can't really, and no one else can help. Then they can have some kind of an open door policy, but that's not always going to be the case. Now, they can assign tasks to subordinates. They can block their time with appointments so that you really can't get access to them. Their assistants become their gatekeepers so that only the people that the CEO wants to allow access can actually get that access. So that's really just a way to keep everyone out and everything out that he doesn't want to handle for whatever reason. And so this actually is a tool that a CEO can use to live a more balanced life. He's unburdened by all the problems that he's facing, and he has other people to help him with that. Now, with a CEO, that actually makes a lot of sense. It may not be something that we like, but it is the fact that they don't have time to deal with every single problem in their company. If you think about the CEO of IBM, the CEO of any of the large companies that we know about, there's no possible way they're going to be able to deal with every single problem that's going on in the company. And there's no reason that they should be expected to. So that's why they have managers and all kinds of other people to help things run as smoothly as possible. But sometimes that means the CEO just doesn't want to deal with problems, and he may hide himself away. He's safe from the demands of his employees, and so nobody can say anything to him. Do we do that as Christians? Maybe we're like some people I've heard about on Facebook who won't accept friend requests from people from other countries. And the reason they won't is not because they don't want to be friendly. It's because they don't want to be asked for money. Has that ever happened to you where you friended someone and they immediately started asking you to help their relatives or help the orphans? And so some people want to hide themselves from that kind of thing. Is that okay? Is that wrong? Have you ever gotten a friend request and then felt guilty for declining it? Are we simply hiding ourselves from people that we could be helping in some ways? Then again, I know people who go even further than this. I know friends who pride themselves on unfriending and blocking people on social media who even casually disagrees with them about something. Is that the answer? Are we supposed to just more and more isolate ourselves away from other people? Maybe it's protecting our phone numbers so that no one can have them except the ones that we want to have them. Is that okay? Now, I know people will think about the things we've said before, and we think this is a matter of degree. And think about, is it okay to deny people friend requests on Facebook because you're afraid they're going to ask for money? Well, if you say that that's not okay, then what about denying someone computer access or friendship with your children if you don't know who they are? Or letting everyone in the community know your children's phone number? See, we all have boundaries of some kind, and it's important that we have them. So how do we draw the line of, how do we decide how much is enough or how much is too much? And it's not an easy decision to make. So I'm going to say that up front. This is a complex discussion, and that's why I'm glad to have it here, because we're going to have a little bit of time to dig in and think about it. And I hope that you will interact with me too. I may say something you completely disagree with. I would love to hear from you. Well, if you find things that you also agree with, I'd love to hear from you on that too. You can reach me at jason@sparksmore.com. I'd love to hear from you. I respond to everything people send me. And I just like making the friendships and building those relationships. But we've all been there. We've all had to make some decisions about whether or not we're going to friend someone. I know a lot of women who say they will never accept the friend request of anyone that they've never met. And I can't blame them, especially when it's men, because men will tend to hit on them, that kind of thing. And of course, we have to be discerning, but how do we know when to be discerning and when to just be open and accepting when people send us a friend request? I think it's a great question. Those kinds of things are what we're dealing with. What about seeing someone on the side of the road? That's one. I remember as a teenager, I heard a sermon where the man who was preaching basically tried to guilt trip everyone into thinking, it's like he compared people who were stranded on the side of the road to someone who is dying. And we we refuse to stop and help them. So how can we say that we love someone? He used the illustration of the Good Samaritan to say that, the Good Samaritan is the only one that would stop and help this man who had been burglarized. He was beaten, left for dead. And, the priest and the Levite walked by, didn't even want to go over there and see him. They kind of looked at him, inspected him, and said, I don't want anything to do with this. And they walked away, but a Samaritan came. And these Samaritans were despised by the Jewish people. And so a Samaritan came by and actually helped the man. He took him to an inn. He paid for his expenses that he needed. And he told the innkeeper, he says, I'm going to leave, but when I come back, if there's anything else that I owe you, please tell me and I'll be glad to pay you for that. He didn't ask to see whether that man was a Jew or not. He didn't ask to see whether that man was a Samaritan. He didn't ask to see if that man had the money to pay him back. He just helped him. And the point of that, of course, is that we should help people. That Jesus's question is, which one was a neighbor to the one who was hurt? The one who was the neighbor is the one who actually did something to help the man. The Jewish people, the Jewish leader, the religious leader, and the rabbi, they actually didn't do anything to help this man, even though they were of the same people. But a Samaritan came who's usually hated by the Jews, and he did more for them. So anyway, in this sermon, the man was telling us that that's the same as seeing someone on the side of the road and you refuse to stop and pick them up. You're just as bad as the Levite and the priest that walked away and didn't help the man. Is that really what we should be talking about? Or is that really what the point of the message was? So I felt guilty. Every time then I saw someone on the side of the road, I would think, man, I need to help that person because I don't want to be like that priest or that Levite and not actually offer to help this person. And then I realized one day that people have been walking for thousands of years and it doesn't hurt them. It's not a life and death situation if somebody's car breaks down. Now, it's different if it's a life and death situation. And I think I probably would have a lot more of a pressure to stop and help. But even then, it's not necessarily something that I'm going to be guilty of sin if I don't help. There are other factors that may be involved. And so that's one of those things where we have to make decisions about boundaries. Are you going to stop and help every single person you ever see? If you do, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm suggesting that if you don't have to feel guilty about that because we're trying to find a balance. But the question really is then about balance. How do you know what the balance is? Can you see Jesus doing any of those kinds of things? Can you see Jesus stopping on the side of the road and picking up strangers? Yeah, I think so. Can you see Jesus blocking people's phone numbers or blocking Facebook requests? I think if you sent Jesus a friend request, if he was on Facebook, every friend request he would accept it. He would know how to handle the people that were coming, of course. But because we know that, does that mean that we're doing wrong because we're not following that example? And some people would be quick to say, yes, absolutely. But I'm going to suggest to you that this is a lot more complex than that. It's a little more complicated. And we do have the right to protect ourselves. And that's really what boundaries are all about. We're finding ways to protect ourselves. And of course, we can abuse that and go too far. But let's get into that idea. The crux of the matter of this episode is, are we allowed to have boundaries? And if so, what are the limits of those boundaries? All right. As I said, this is a little more difficult because it's requiring us to have balance. And nothing about the life of Jesus seems balanced. If we're going to look at him then as an example, we have to ask the question, really, is there really even a balance that we should have? Is it that we should not have any other things, activities in life except being a Christian? So our only pursuit is nothing but trying to spread Christianity. Is that what life is about? Is that what God expects for us? And that's a very good question, because if you look at the life of Jesus, he spent his ministry doing nothing but, except we do see that he had friendships with people, right? We see that he was eating with people and spending time. He would even spend time in prayer. He would spend time resting with his disciples. So while we see Jesus in that ministry time, his whole entire focus was really getting to the cross. We also see that there were other things that he did. He had a balance of sorts, because he didn't just go around preaching. That's the only thing he ever did, was just preach, because we see that he spent time with the disciples in time of training and teaching and spending time with one another, resting. Could you imagine if Jesus took the disciples off to rest? And I put rest in quotation marks here, because what if Jesus took them off to rest, and the entire time that they were gone, he simply lectured them on the Bible and its meaning? Could Jesus have done that? Absolutely. But when I think of rest, when it says he took them aside so that they could rest, it's because they've already been teaching and preaching, and they just needed some time to get away. So Jesus had balance, but we don't see it in the same way that we see it. Now, the balance that he had was finding rest, finding times of relaxation, spending time getting to know people, building relationships, having friendships, eating with people, going to weddings. There's all kinds of things that he did. And of course, all of it relates to, in some way, him teaching and preaching, but it wasn't just teaching and preaching all the time. There was a balance there. We also need to remember that was 3 or 3.5 years of his life. He had 33 years of life, and 3 of it was that. What about the rest of his life? We don't really know. We don't know what he did. Did he go around preaching and teaching? It doesn't seem like it. There's no indication that he did. We do have an indication when he was 12 that he went to the temple by himself. Remember, he went to the temple and his parents didn't realize that he wasn't with them, and they left him there in Jerusalem. Of course, they were in panic, and they came and they found him there in the temple, talking with people, teaching them and asking them questions. And the implication of the questions that he asked was that he was actually helping them to come to realization about certain things. He was teaching. But that doesn't mean that he spent all of his time teaching. He probably had to learn some math, right? He probably took school while he was growing up. There were a lot of things that he did. He had normal child activities while he was a child. And then young adult. I don't know if he ever had a job. It's very likely that he worked with his dad. That's the way things worked back then. Joseph, being a carpenter, probably would have had him in the carpentry shop. Now, we don't know where Joseph went. It seems like he was most likely dead by the time Jesus came on the scene when he was about 30. But before that, we don't know. It's very possible that Joseph had him in there cutting wood and learning how to make boats and things like this. So Jesus had a balanced life, and we shouldn't think that because he spent 3.5 years focused on preaching and teaching, and that was his entire focus, that doesn't mean that his entire life was only that too. And of course, Jesus then was different from us. He lived in a culture that was very, very different from us, for example, and his mission was very different. He's the only man in history who was born and knew that his mission in life was to simply die for the sake of everyone else. There's no one else that's ever done that before. So that qualifies him to be seen as having a unique mission. Our life mission is different from his. That's just by default because his is unique. He was a leader also, and he had to establish something that required a tremendous amount of energy and effort. You know, the final 3 years of his life on earth, every thought and activity centered on that one event, the cross. And leaders do things that their followers never have to do. That's why they're leaders. That's why they're so valuable to us. They make sacrifices that their followers never make and couldn't ever make. And literally, that's true with us. There's no possible way that we could do what Jesus did literally in the sense of giving our lives for the entire world. It's just not possible. So when we look at Jesus and his life, we have to recognize that there's some special circumstances going on that we have to take into consideration. So every time even during the time that Jesus lived, and during this time of focus, he had compassion for people. He showed love. He worshiped God. He spent time enjoying the company of others. And that means he had some kind of a balance in his life. It means even in our focused discipline of bringing all those parts of life into alignment, all the little pieces of our lives coming into alignment together, we still have those other parts. We're not going to ignore our responsibilities in any area of life. So we shouldn't abandon different responsibilities that we have because we're pursuing the goal of being a Christian. It's unified focus is what we're looking at. In other words, I shouldn't abandon my responsibility for my children, or my responsibility for my parents, or my responsibility for the rest of my family or my friends. None of those should ever be abandoned because I'm seeking to serve God. In fact, those opportunities and relationships are a way that I serve God, and that's how we have to see it. Another thing to consider about this is that Jesus accepted all kinds of evil things against him because he was destined to die in that way, so that God would be able to destroy the power of the devil. He would destroy the guilt of sin and the sting of death. And the only way that was possible was for Jesus to come and suffer and die the way that he did it. Because of that, he was under special circumstances. So we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about what it means to be balanced, whether or not we can have protective measures for ourselves. Jesus didn't protect himself from death on the cross. Does that mean that we can never protect ourselves in any way? So we're going to look at that idea, and I think that I put my finger on maybe the problem that we're seeing, or the area where we have to have this discussion, because we're looking at Jesus, and it seems in some ways that he was a pacifist, in that he just allowed people to do whatever they wanted to him. He never had any boundaries. He allowed them to impose upon him. He never said no. He always did everything everyone expected of him. And I think that's the impression that we get, but we're going to see that that's actually not completely accurate. He did have boundaries. He did have rules of engagement, so to speak. He did train people how to treat him. And we can learn from that as well. We can look at ourselves and set up boundaries for what we're going to allow to happen to us, or how we're going to allow people to treat us and interact with us. And we do this all the time. We tell people that they're only able to meet with us at certain times of the day. And, even when they call, even when they are allowed to call us during the evenings, so to speak. If you had a friend who just continuously called you at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning every night, it's not going to be long till you put up a boundary, right? You're going to tell this person, no, I don't want you calling me that often. I don't want you to call me unless it's before a certain time at night. So you say before 10 o'clock, you can feel free to call me, or before 9 o'clock. You're going to set up a boundary. And most of our society recognizes that there are boundaries, and we kind of have adopted a set of boundaries just because we've kind of inherited that. And there's nothing wrong with it. So we do this all the time, and it's important to recognize them. We tell people that we're not going to be treated in certain ways that we don't like to be treated. We even decide to leave people and never see them again because of the way we're treated. And I'm talking about leaving friends and looking at the life that we're living, and we may take a certain amount of abuse, but there becomes a limit, right? There comes a limit to where we say, this is enough, and I'm not going to have anything to do with this anymore. We don't allow people into our personal space unless we give permission. So how does it feel when someone just walks up, puts his nose on your nose? That's very uncomfortable. And if they're very friendly and nice, we may just step back. But if they come up and they're steaming and angry, it looks like they're about to attack, and they put nose to nose, we're going to put our guard up. We're going to definitely put up boundaries and even push them away because we don't want them in our space. There's nothing wrong with that. We also tell people to respect our time and not to be late to engagements with us. There's a reason that it's rude to be late, because when you're late, you're thinking of yourself, but not those other people. And so bosses will tell you, listen, you can't be late at this job. They're setting up boundaries. We do that with people all the time. We tell people to respect our times. We set up all kinds of boundaries for how we will accept treatment from others. And this is what we call strength and self-protection. However, And here's really, I think, where the difficulty comes, and we've already touched on this with talking about Jesus. Jesus called us to a life of death. He said, take up your cross daily. He also told us to go the extra mile. We're told to turn the other cheek when one side is slapped. We're also supposed to give everything that people ask of us, we're supposed to give them without ever expecting them to return it. We're supposed to accept brutal treatment and simply pray for them in response, to pray for those who persecute us. Jesus never said to retaliate. He said, when someone mistreats you, when they persecute you, you praise God for it. You're blessed, realize you're blessed, and also pray for those who persecute you. So how do we reconcile that? Should we reconcile that? This is the root of how we see life. Should we throw out boundaries and simply let people do whatever they want without us saying anything about it? A lot of that is coming from actually misinterpretation of passages. We're talking about some passages that people throw around about how we should be passive, we should turn the other cheek, that kind of thing. Things Jesus actually said, but we can take them out of context and it really harm ourselves because we don't understand it properly. We are supposed to die to ourselves daily. And that means that we're taking up the cross daily. So Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So do not be conformed to this world. You're going to have to be transformed by renewing your mind. But previous to that, he said that we die, we're a living sacrifice, as he says it. We present ourselves then as a living sacrifice. So that means we're sacrificing ourselves, we're sacrificing our own desires, the things that we want to have happen to us, and sometimes even our own security and safety is sacrificed. Wouldn't that be part of taking up your cross? It must be something that we do. Now, what this is talking about is it's talking about people who are, of course, Christians, and the attitude that we should have, that we are here to serve other people. And when we set up boundaries, if we go too far with that, we will actually prevent ourselves from being able to help other people, to be able to serve other people. And that's certainly not what we want to do. So we have to have a way of balancing that out. And that's something I want to start by talking about, that when you look at Romans chapter 12, verse 1, that we are a living sacrifice, that doesn't mean that we can never have any kind of boundaries, but it also means that we need to be careful if we set up boundaries that we're not taking ourselves out of play, so to speak. So we can arrange our lives so that we'll never have anything bad happen to us, or we can attempt that. We can arrange our lives so that we actually never have an opportunity to do any good, to interact with other people, because we're taking the danger out of that interaction. And anytime you take the danger out, you're also taking out the opportunities. We need to be able to do good to people. And in order to be doing good with other people, then we have to know what they need. And the only way we're going to know what they need is to allow ourselves to interact with other people so that we can see their needs. That's how we serve other people. So we can go so far in creating boundaries that we actually hurt our ability to do good. There is a danger that I see in Romans chapter 12 and verse 1 if we're talking about boundaries, because we're supposed to be living for someone else. Now let's get into the idea of going the extra mile and turning the other cheek, because those are not really about self-denial as much as they are about self-preservation. And a lot of times we see it that way. We see it as this is about self-denial. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, it says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks, And from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. These are verses 38 through 42 that are often used to kind of, I think in some ways, scare people into not ever saying no. That we're always supposed to be willing and open. We can't ever have any boundaries for ourselves. And so we're supposed to just let people do whatever they're going to do. This is really not the point. This isn't, like I said, this is not about self-denial. It's more actually about self-preservation and how we can preserve ourselves. This is a strategy. Now remember that Jesus didn't come to start a physical revolution. He didn't come to set up a physical kingdom. In spite of what you might have been taught about him, he didn't want to set up a physical kingdom. In fact, in John chapter 6 and verse 15, it says that the people sought to make him king by force, but he refused. Now, this wasn't a timing issue. It wasn't the fact that it just wasn't the right time, or it wasn't, and it also wasn't because it was going to be done by force. It was because he didn't come up to set up a physical kingdom. John chapter 18 and verse 36 is a great passage to talk about this, because it shows that Jesus wanted to establish a spiritual kingdom and not a physical kingdom. John 18 and verse 36 said, Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." So he's saying my kingdom is not of this world. It's not worldly. It's spiritual. That's what he said the entire time he was on earth. He never came in order to set up a physical kingdom in Jerusalem. He had never had that intention. He always wanted to set up a kingdom, and that kingdom is in heaven. But it's the kingdom that is established here on earth it's kind of a footprint here, a forward mission area of the kingdom of heaven, that we have now the kingdom in the sense of the spiritual organization that Jesus built. He built his church. That's the kingdom. That's what he was talking about when he talked about establishing his kingdom and building his kingdom. So while we may have misunderstandings about what the church is, he was very clear in what he was trying to do and trying to build. And he didn't want anything to do with the physical throne in Jerusalem. It was also because he was coming to set up a spiritual kingdom. It was his responsibility to teach in a way that they would not think he was trying to start a war with Rome, because the people that were living in his time were looking for the Messiah to come, and they believed that when he came, that he would arm the Jewish people and they would just travel the world. They would romp over all the nations. They would destroy Rome, and everything would be great, and they would actually rule the entire globe. That's what they were looking for. So now Jesus, who didn't want to do that, is in a situation where his people are thinking that's what he wants to do if he's the Messiah. And so he has to teach them in a way that they will realize he's not wanting to start a war. And now this was very confusing for them. So when he said things like go the extra mile and turn your other cheek to them when you're slapped, that was absolutely mind-boggling to them. It was very difficult for them to understand. It's difficult for people nowadays to understand. And a lot of that is because they missed the spiritual nature of the kingdom. They keep thinking he's going to create a physical kingdom. He's not going to do that. But his desire was to create a spiritual kingdom. So he had to make sure to tell them about what they're going to suffer and how to overcome those things, how to get through it in the best way. He made sure to tell them that there were indignities and pains that were going to be suffered by all of them, but it was that they were going to suffer those things for something better. It wasn't that they were going to suffer for a physical kingdom. They're going to suffer spiritually for a spiritual kingdom. So if a Roman soldier forced somebody to carry a load for a mile, actually, according to Roman law, that soldier was authorized to do that. He could walk up to a slave or to really pretty much anyone that wasn't a Roman citizen and tell them to carry the load, but they could only have them carry it for a mile. So if a Roman soldier forced you to do that, you had no choice. You had a choice. You could either refuse to do it, which means you're going to be in trouble. They probably could just beat you right there. Or you can make the best of it by doing it and getting over with, right? In fact, Jesus actually went a step further. It wasn't sinful to carry a load of, a load for a troopman, was it? A soldier. It wasn't wrong to carry the load. And so Jesus said, listen, if he asks you to carry it 1 mile, go 2. The attitude is what he's talking about. It's an opportunity to do a good deed. He went a step further. It's not wrong to carry that load, but if you see it differently, it could actually be something that is a good deed. But for it to be a good deed, you're going to have to do more than just carry it for the mile, because, if you're doing what you're told, you can't really turn around and say, hey, I did a good deed. No, you did what you're told to do. You did what was demanded of you at the time. You had no choice. But if you actually have if you actually reach the end of your mile and say, I'll go another mile with you. I'll be glad to carry it for you for another mile. You have to have a very good attitude, first of all, don't you? So your attitude is going to adjust. And the attitude is not, okay, fine, I'll do this because I have to. The attitude actually becomes, I want to serve. I want to help. And I'm going to go this extra mile with you because I want to. It's from the goodness of my heart. Now, that may not make a huge impression on that person, but it very well could. What it's doing, though, is planting a seed. But if you do what you're expected to do, that's not planting a seed. You do more than that it's expected to you, you'll plant a seed. That shows that we're doing it from a good heart. And incidentally, if somebody is disrespecting you and you actually do something good to them, you might think that they might continue to disrespect us. And really, that is a possibility, at least for a little while. But sooner or later, your good deed will win them over. They will actually start to like you. They'll actually start to appreciate what you're doing for them if you're consistent. So in that way, you're creating a relationship with them. You're creating a relationship that's based on love. You're not only helping yourself by teaching them to treat you differently, you're also helping other people who they may call on later. So this soldier is learning from the Christian how to treat people the right way. And once that soldier gets that figured out, he's going to treat other people in the right way as well, because everyone does what they know is right, or at least they want to do what they think is right. Most people don't want to intentionally do what they think is wrong. So when you teach people to do better, they do better. That means you're not only helping yourself, you're helping other people by training people how to interact with you. So setting a boundary is actually a good thing. And this is a form of a boundary. It's showing them a recognition that, yes, I'm a human being and I choose to actually go beyond my boundaries and to do good because that's the kind of person that I am. And that's who a Christian is. That's actually a strategy for helping yourself, protect yourself. So the picture of going an extra mile is one of sacrifice, but it's not about being a doormat. It's actually a way to create boundaries and train people how to treat you. But this really doesn't apply to every kind of relationship that we have. Please don't get me wrong. If someone has the power or authority to force us to do things for them, that's what this is application for. You do it with a smile. Now, of course, if sin is involved, that's completely different. We can't submit to someone who has authority over us, who requires us to sin for them or with them. If a Roman soldier, for example, tried to compel a Christian to rob a store for them, Jesus would never say, so rob 2 stores instead of just 1. Now, we're talking about things that are legal, that are morally okay. We just can't get out of doing them. Well, we can change our attitude and we can actually go the extra mile and actually show love to this other people. What about when he says to turn the other cheek? Listen to what he said again. I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. The idea of resisting here means not to put up a fight. That is, we're not going to go to war over this. It's actually about standing up for yourself in a peaceful manner. Now let's talk about some things that Jesus didn't say here. He didn't say if someone pulls a sword and lops off your arm that you're going to turn your other arm to him also. He didn't say if somebody pulls out a gun and threatens your life that you're going to go ahead and say pull the trigger. None of those things apply. This is something that's a slap on the face. This is not something that is life and death. This is an indignity that is presented to us. We get spit on, or we get our face slapped, or we have, our feet stepped on in some way. So we're talking about an event or an activity that someone does to us. It really isn't that big of a deal. It's not worth going to war over. And you think about if someone is an evil person and they come and slap you and you slap them, what's going to be the response? It's going to be you're going to have a big fight. Now, that's not always going to be the case. But someone said, when I was a young man, they said, we were talking about fighting, physically fighting. And the man was a Marine. And he said, when you're in high school or junior high, two guys can fight and somebody might get hurt. But when two men fight, somebody's going to die. And that's very likely the case. So now we have to ask ourselves, if someone slaps me, is it worth dying over? Is this really what you want to fight, give up your life because of an indignity? Now, it may not always lead to death. I realize that. But we're taking the chance, right? We don't know what's going to happen. If someone's evil and they walk up to you and they slap you and you slap them back, who's to say they're not going to just shoot you? We don't know. So that's one application of this that we need to think about. And we need to also remember that we're talking about how that can escalate. If somebody slaps you, the response should be, according to Jesus, is to turn to them the other cheek. That's about standing up for yourself in a peaceful manner. If somebody slaps you and you cower from them in fear, we all know how it is with bullies, right? Have you ever had to stand up to one? Usually they'll back down and they may, as some of my friends would say, you stand up to a bully, you may get a beating, but he'll respect you later. You stand up to a bully, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you strike back if they hit you, but you just stand your ground. And most of the time, they're not going to pursue this. But if you cower, if you just walk away, or you bow down to them in fear, kind of sniveling fear, that kind of thing might actually encourage them to continue it. If they're already a mean enough person that they feel like they can abuse people who they see as inferior to them, then acting more inferior to them is just going to make it actually worse. The Romans, for example, thought that the Jews were basically dogs, and they could treat them however they wanted to treat them, and it was absolutely okay in that society, and it really was as far as the law was concerned. Romans could just do whatever they wanted to. If someone was slapped and they simply stood up and turned their other cheek to them, that would cause them to take a step back. It would cause them to take notice. It would give them pause because they would see a human being there, not a dog, not someone who's cowering in fear, but they would see a human being. And they're also seeing someone who's not retaliating. It's not that you're doing something wrong, but it actually is a way that they can actually have respect for you because you're not backing down. You're not afraid of them. You're simply showing that you believe you have value and worth. And when you have value and worth in yourself, other people can see it as well. So it's okay to set up boundaries for ourselves. It's okay to protect ourselves from others. And that's not contradicting the example of Jesus. And that's not opposed, that's not being selfish if we're trying to protect ourselves. This is about taking care of yourself and so that you can be better service to other people. Jesus himself carved out time when he was alone. He set boundaries. He went off by himself to pray many times. He took his disciples aside for them to rest and recover too. That's a type of boundary that he created, or as we've already discussed. So we need to understand that setting up boundaries is not the same thing as being selfish or worldly, But now it is possible to use the concept of boundaries and to insulate ourselves from the world, or to use it as an excuse to be worldly minded and selfish. So we need to be careful of what the boundaries are for boundaries. What is it that we're allowed to do, and how do we know we've gone too far? Well, here are a few questions to ask. Have we arranged our lives so that it's impossible for anyone to burden us with requests for help or whatever? Have we kind of isolated ourselves from everyone so that we're not in their lives, so that we have no way of ever having to be burdened by them? Do we shut out all types of communication with people so that we're not inconvenienced with requests from them? I mean, shut it all down. We'd never have anyone contact us. If somebody needs something from us, they couldn't get a hold of us anyway. Do we ever allow new people into our lives when there's always a risk involved in that? And there's always a risk of some kind involved when you get new friends. Some of that risk may simply be inconvenience. But see, I've learned that in our society, inconvenience is a great sin. That if you inconvenience other people, this can be a very, very bad thing. Everyone wants the convenience of being able to block people who are inconvenient to them, right? And the easiest way to do that is just never make any new friends. We never reach out beyond ourselves. We have our own few people that we know, and we interact with no one else because it's safer that way. But I want to encourage you to think about this. We've talked about boundaries. We talked about how that's okay and that Jesus actually didn't teach that we had to be doormats. But there's another part of this, and that part of this is the fact that we are expected to do good. God wants us to do good. And God has given us a lot of opportunities in life to do good, and we need to pay attention to those opportunities and use them up. When we use those opportunities, we'll have even more opportunities. Now, that's what the parable of the talents teaches us. In Matthew chapter 25, I'm going to read this parable to you. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. Immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought another 5 talents, saying, Lord, you delivered me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things, and I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore take the talent from him, give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, this popular parable teaches us that we have been given so many opportunities by God. In this case, it's represented by the word talents. Now, we usually use that word talents to talk about abilities that we have. And in a sense, that's going to be true. But I want you to notice something here that we can expand this idea of talents a little bit. Because it says in verse 15, to the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on his journey. So this master gave his servants talents that were based upon their abilities. They already had ability. He's giving them talents to be able to use those abilities. So really what that represents in many ways, and maybe even in the most significant way, is that a talent represents an opportunity to grow that talent, to increase it even more. So we have an ability, we use that ability, and it grows and it increases, and we get even more abilities based upon that. So our talents can grow. Our opportunities also will grow. Have you ever noticed that when you take advantage of an opportunity, a whole lot of other doors will open up for you as well. But if you never take advantage of any opportunities, you never have any more opportunities that come your way. Doors won't open. So this is what we can learn from this. These are some things that we need to know from this. First of all, God wants us to do good. We have opportunity to do good. It's all around us. We have the ability to do good, and He provides for us the opportunities to do this. And God has given us those opportunities. We need to pay attention to those opportunities and use them. And when we use those opportunities, we'll get even more opportunity. And we're talking about opportunity to do good. But there are ways that we can hide ourselves away and isolate ourselves. So let's think about that related to us as Christians. And there are three basic ways that we hide ourselves from opportunities to do good. The first one is sometimes we use religious activities to substitute for real work that we should do as Christians. Now, I'm not saying that worship isn't work. It is, and it is required of us to do those things. But we can so fill up our schedules with doing things of worship that we actually get so busy that we don't actually have time to do any other things that are good. I'm not attempting to convince people to spend less time in worship, but I want to encourage you to spend more time doing good things. Worship is not the only thing we're supposed to do. It's it's the most important perhaps, but it's on a scale, it is very small as far as how much time is committed compared to how much time we should be committing to doing good for other people. We should be eager to find ways to do good. Another thing that we do to hide ourselves from opportunities is that we actually use scriptures as an excuse not to help someone who's out of work, for example, who people who are in need. It says in 2 Thessalonians 3:10, "For even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat." Now that's the most common excuse given for not helping someone in need. And I'm not saying that it's invalid. It is a valid principle. If you don't want to work, if you don't even try to take care of yourself, then why should anyone else take care of you? It's completely unwise to just throw our money around for people who don't want to do anything but beg. And we know that people should take care of themselves as much as possible. But we also know that at times people need our help. So do we insulate ourselves so we never have the opportunity to help people? People who legitimately need our help? Do we simply say, well, I'm not even going to attempt it because it's their problem if they don't have a job? Do we set up a framework that helps us decide who to help? Or do we just automatically refuse everyone? If we automatically refuse everyone, we're actually abusing that passage. And the third way is that we never get outside of our homes and into the lives of other people. That's a really convenient way to avoid helping people. Just never get into their lives. But it's selfish at some point. I mean, sure, we all need time to unwind and rest. I'm not saying that we can't rest, but as a society, we're very much closed off. Think about, just a few decades ago, how much has changed. Even in this year, how much has changed about people closing themselves off. But as a country, we're getting more and more isolated from other people because we're getting more and more involved in our own lives, and we're not really reaching out into the lives of other people at all. And when we do that, we actually avoid a lot of problems that they have, and therefore we also avoid a lot of the opportunities that we have to do good. Opportunities to do good and problems always go hand in hand. If they had no problems, then we wouldn't have the opportunity to do good. They have to be there. The problems have to be there, and we have to see them, or we won't have any way to help them. So don't be so isolated that you're never in the lives of anyone else. Sure, set boundaries, but make sure those boundaries are not blocking you off from being able to do good, because as Christians, according to Titus chapter 2, we were created in order to do good works, that this is what we're zealous to do. We're trying to find opportunities to do good for other people. And if we never see the opportunity to do good for other people, we're not living the way God wants us to live. Because that's what being a Christian is all about. Loving the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Loving our neighbor as ourselves. It's easy to say we love our neighbor, but if we actually never even attempt to have the opportunity to do good to them, we really can't say that we're actually showing love to anyone. I may feel love, but that doesn't mean I'm showing it. So I hope this has helped you a little bit. It's trying to help you see a balance between setting boundaries and realizing that, yes, it's perfectly fine for us to set boundaries. It's reasonable for us to set boundaries, but we want to make sure we don't go too far in setting these boundaries so that we miss out on the opportunities to serve God and to serve other people. So I believe that part of growth means that I'm setting up boundaries, but then as a Christian, as I grow more and more, I realize that those boundaries, while they're good, they may be a little restrictive. And sometimes that means I'm expanding my boundary. And I expand it as much as possible without hurting myself and without being able to cutting my own, my nose off to spite my face, right? I don't want to hurt myself so that I can't help anyone else. So I've got to find that balance. And that balance is somewhere in between being a doormat and being a hermit. Well, may the Lord help us all figure out where that balance is. If there's anything I can do for you to help you with that, or if you would like to discuss this further, please contact me, jason@sparksmore.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.